98 times. In a single book, one writer used the same Greek verb pisteuo to believe 98 times, not approximately, not around 100. 98 deliberate, counted occurrences. That is almost half of every single use of that word across the entire New Testament, packed into one document by one hand. This is the Gospel of John, and it is, without question, the most belief-saturated text in the ancient world. But here is where the ground shifts beneath you. Search that same Gospel for the Greek noun pistis, the word we translate as faith, and you find exactly 0 occurrences, not once. In the most obsessive exploration of believing ever written, John never once used the word faith. Sit with the strangeness of that for a moment. The other Gospels use it. Matthew uses the noun, Mark uses it, Luke uses it, Paul builds entire arguments on it. Across the rest of the New Testament, faith, the noun appears more than 200 times. And the one writer who could not stop talking about belief, the man who circled back to it 98 times in 21 chapters, refused to ever call it that. Think about what that means. The writer most fixated on believing went out of his way to never name it as a thing you can hold. Was this an accident? A quirk of style? A small gap that nobody bothered to fill? Or was John making a choice so deliberate that it quietly changes everything about how we understand what believing actually is? And here is the question that ties ancient Greek manuscripts to the way you live this week, to the way WokeFaith Finance thinks about money, trust, and action. Does it matter whether faith is something you have or something you do? Hold that question, because before we can answer it, we need to understand who John was writing for and why he could not afford to get this wrong. Picture Ephesus, sometime around the year 95, a port city on the western edge of what is now Turkey. Marble columns catching the late sun, the smell of salt and fish coming off the harbor, the noise of Roman commerce filling streets that ran past one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the great temple of Artemis. Into that city, scattered among the merchants and the dock workers and the Roman officials, were small communities of believers trying to hold their world together after a catastrophe most of us can barely imagine. Here is the catastrophe. 25 years earlier, Jerusalem had burned. In the year 70, Roman legions broke the city and tore down the temple, the single building around which Jewish faith had literally orbited for 1,000 years. The place where heaven and earth were said to touch. The place every prayer turned toward. Rubble. And in the decades after, the eyewitnesses to Jesus were dying off, one by one. The men and women who had actually walked the dusty roads of Galilee, who had heard his voice carry across the water, who could say, "I was there," they were old now, and they were disappearing. The people John was writing for had never touched the hem of his robe, never heard him speak, never watched a blind man open his eyes for the first time. They were second-generation believers, holding on to testimony they could not personally verify. And it was about to get harder. Domitian's reign brought a new pressure to bear on communities like these. The emperor leaned into titles of divinity in a way his predecessors had not, and refusing to honor him carried a cost that fell hardest on people who would bow to no one but God. We do not know the precise shape of what John's readers faced. Scholars debate how organized the pressure really was, but the texture of the gospel assumes a community under strain, a people being asked, in 100 small ways, to let go, to stop showing up, to quietly file their belief away as a private thing they used to hold. That is the world John wrote into, a world where the witnesses were vanishing, the proof was secondhand, the cost was rising, and the question pressing on every household was brutally simple. How do you keep believing in someone you have never seen, when everyone who saw him is gone and the world is leaning on you to quit? Now, the scholarship around this gospel is careful, and it is worth being precise. Most critical scholars date the Gospel of John to the years 90 through 100, with some linking its final form to the reign of the Emperor Domitian around 95 or 96. Early church tradition, especially Irenaeus, writing in the 2nd century, places John in Ephesus, though some scholars propose Syria as an alternative. Whether the author was one apostle or a whole Johannine community shaping and refining these words across a generation is genuinely unsettled. Honest readers can land on either side. But this much is not in dispute. John tells us, in his own words, exactly what he was doing. Near the end, In chapter 20, he stops the narrative and speaks directly to the reader. There were many other signs Jesus did, he says, that are not written in this book. But these specific ones were written so that you may believe. That is not the language of a man recording a biography. That is the language of an editor, a builder. Someone who selected these stories, chose these signs, and assembled them with surgical precision to produce a single effect in people who had seen nothing. This was not biography. It was a lifeline. And here is something most people miss. Scholars have long noticed that John is structured around a finite, deliberate set of miracles, often called the Book of Signs. Water turned to wine at a wedding in Cana. A royal official's dying son healed from a distance. A man paralyzed for 38 years told to stand up and walk. 5,000 fed from a boy's lunch. Jesus walking across a storm. A man born blind given sight. And, finally, a dead man named Lazarus called out of his tomb after 4 days. These were not dropped in at random. They were chosen, sequenced, escalating from a quiet miracle at a party to a corpse walking out of a grave. John was not writing down everything. He was curating evidence, building a case, and the case was engineered to do one thing: to push a reader who never saw any of it toward the verb. Each sign asks a little more of you than the last. Believe water became wine at a party, and you have given up very little. Believe a man 4 days dead walked out of his own tomb, still wrapped in his grave clothes, and you have crossed a line you cannot uncross. John stacks the signs in that order on purpose, walking the reader up a staircase of escalating demand, because he is not after a casual nod. He is after the kind of belief that holds when the cost arrives. So John knew exactly what he was doing. He chose his words the way a watchmaker chooses gears, which makes the absence of one word pistis, faith, not a gap at all. It is a choice. A loud, deliberate, repeated choice. But why? Why would the man most obsessed with belief refuse the most natural word for it? To see the answer, we need to set John beside the one writer who did the opposite. Paul gives us the sharpest possible contrast. In his 7 undisputed letters, the ones nearly every scholar agrees came from his own hand. Researchers count 91 uses of the noun pistis and 42 uses of the verb pisteuo. Stop and look at those numbers next to John's. John, 98 verbs, 0 nouns. Paul, 91 nouns, 42 verbs. It is a near-perfect inversion. 2 of the most important writers in human history, both fixated on the same reality, reaching for opposite ends of the same word. And Paul does it on purpose. In Romans, in the stretch running from chapter 3 through chapter 5, he stacks the noun like bricks in a wall. Faith as the ground of being made right with God. Faith as the thing Abraham had before the law existed. Faith as a theological category you can name and weigh and measure and put at the center of an argument. He does it again in Galatians, chapters 2 and 3. He even plays the noun and the verb against each other in the same breath, holding them in deliberate tension, because for Paul, the noun is doing essential work. Faith, the thing, is the hinge the whole gospel turns on. And he needs it to be a thing. Think about what Paul is arguing. He is building a courtroom case, humanity guilty, the law unable to acquit, and then a verdict of righteous, handed down to anyone who has this one thing. For an argument like that, faith almost has to be a noun. It has to be the object placed on the scale opposite the weight of human failure. Paul is a lawyer drawing up the contract, and a contract needs a thing you can point to and say, this is what counts. The noun is exactly the right tool for the job he is doing. John is not doing that job. John is not arguing a verdict. He is keeping a flame lit in a room where the wind keeps blowing. And you do not keep a flame lit by owning it. You keep it lit by tending it. So where Paul reaches for the brick, John reaches for the breath. John never does this, not once in 21 chapters. Here is what that distinction actually means, and why it is not a trivial piece of grammar. The noun pistis is something you possess. It is a quality, a credential. A noun is a thing, and a thing can be owned, pointed to, packaged, inherited, put on a resume. I have faith. Notice the verb in that sentence is have. The faith just sits there, an object in your hands, static, owned, and quietly, dangerously, past tense, something you acquired once and now carry. The verb pisteuo is different in its bones. It is something you are doing right now, in this moment. It is active, ongoing. It points outward, toward a person, the way the verb to trust always needs an object. You trust someone. You cannot stockpile a verb. You cannot inherit it. You have to keep doing it, or it stops. And here's the part that makes John's choice almost surgical. Greek verbs carry something English barely has aspect. A Greek writer choosing a verb is not just choosing an action. He is choosing the shape of that action in time. The present tense in Greek is not simply now. It is durative, ongoing, a line rather than a dot action that keeps unfolding. The aorist is the dot, a single act, complete, snapped shut. So when John reaches again and again for the verb instead of the noun, and reaches over and over for it in the present tense, he is not just saying believe. He is saying be believing, keep at it. Let it run like a line that does not end. That is a decision no English Bible can fully show you, because English flattens the line and the dot into the same tired word. There is one more layer, hiding in the noun's own history. Pistis, the word John refused, did not start out meaning a warm inner conviction. In ordinary Greek, it could mean a pledge, a guarantee, a proof, a deposit you put down to seal a contract. It was a word at home in the marketplace, in the courtroom, the kind of thing you hand over and then walk away from. Business done. You can see why a writer training people to keep showing up might have flinched at it. The noun closes the deal. The verb keeps the relationship alive. The scholar Gerald O'Collins put the difference plainly. For John, he said, believing is the appropriate ongoing relationship of disciples to Christ, not a possession, not an abstract quality. Now, to be fair, some scholars push back here. They argue that John's avoidance of the noun is just his idiolect, his personal verbal habit, a stylistic taste for verbs over nouns, with no deep theology riding on it. And that is a real argument worth taking seriously. But consider the counterweight. John's vocabulary is deliberately smaller and more controlled than the other Gospels. He uses fewer words, and he uses them more intentionally, circling the same handful of terms: light, life, water, truth, love. Believe like an artist, working in a restricted palette on purpose. And his own statement of purpose in chapter 20 is surgical in its clarity about what he is trying to do. When a writer that controlled, that deliberate, leaves out the single most natural word for his central theme and uses its verb form 98 times instead, the weight of the evidence does not point toward accident. John did not lose the noun, he refused it. And here is where it stops being abstract, because John did not just make this choice in theory. He embedded it in 3 specific conversations that changed everything, and not one of them appears in any other gospel. Watch how the choice plays out in flesh and blood. Nicodemus comes at night. That detail is doing work. He is a Pharisee, a member of the Sanhedrin, the ruling council, a man with credentials, training, institutional standing, the religious equivalent of every degree on the wall. By every metric available in first-century Jerusalem, this man already has faith. He is the faith. And he opens the conversation with a careful theological affirmation. Rabbi, we know you are a teacher come from God. Notice what that is. It is a statement, a position, a possession he is holding out like a credential. And Jesus does not say, good, strengthen the faith you already have. He does not say, your faith is almost there. He says something that lands like a door opening onto a cliff. You must be born again. You must start over from nothing. And then the word lands, believe. The verb, not, have more faith. Do something, right now, in response to who is standing in front of you. The man with the most faith in the room is told he has to begin. And notice what that exposes. For Nicodemus, the noun was not the doorway. It was the wall. All his stored-up religious standing, the training, the title, the position on the council, had become a thing he held instead of a thing he did, and the holding was the very problem. He had so much faith as a possession that he had stopped believing as an action. Jesus does not ask him to add to the pile. He asks him to put the whole pile down and move. Then there is the woman at the well in Samaria, the mirror image of Nicodemus in every way. No credentials, no status, the wrong ethnicity in the eyes of Jerusalem, the wrong history, with 5 husbands behind her, and a 6th man who was not. She comes to the well in the heat of the day, alone, because she cannot face the other women. And Jesus does not ask her to acquire faith. He has nothing to ask her to acquire. She has nothing to bring. He asks her to recognize and to respond, to do the thing. The verb is the door she walks through, and she walks through it so completely that she runs back into the town she was avoiding and pulls the whole village out to see him. A councilman who had everything was told to start with nothing. A woman who had nothing was handed everything. And the hinge in both stories is not a noun you hold. It is a verb you do. And then the farewell discourse, chapters 13 through 17, the long, aching final conversation Jesus has with his closest friends in the hours before the cross. He knows what is coming. They do not really. The bread is still on the table. Judas has just gone out into the dark. And in those chapters he uses believe as a living command, said over and over. Keep believing. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Keep believing. The Greek there is present tense, continuous, not hold on to the faith you have. Keep doing this. Keep doing it tomorrow when I am gone. Keep doing it the morning after, when nothing makes sense and the man you bet your life on is in a tomb. That is the point in the conversation where you would most expect a noun, a man saying goodbye, telling his friends to hold on to something, to keep the faith like a keepsake. But that is exactly what he does not say. He hands them no object to clutch. He hands them an action to repeat, believe, and then believe again. The instruction for surviving his absence is not a thing to grip. It is a thing to do. Every day, he is not there. Here is the pattern that clicks into place. In every scene that only John recorded, belief is never something you hold. It is something you do, in the present moment, in response to who Jesus is. The councilman, the outcast, the inner circle, three completely different starting points, one identical demand. What is your instinct here? Does that distinction actually change anything about how you live it out? Or is it just a clever fact about Greek? Because look at how the word faith functions today, in the air around you. It is a bio word, a bumper sticker, a category on a nonprofit's tax form. I'm a person of faith. We're a faith-based organization. Notice the grammar. Every single time it is a noun, sitting still, attached to you like a label on a jar. Static, owned, past tense. Nobody walks around saying I'm a person of believing, because believing, the verb, would demand something of you every single morning. It would have to be true again today, or it would not be true at all. The noun is comfortable precisely because it asks nothing. John's community could not afford that comfort. That is the whole point. They had lost the temple, the great noun, the thing you could point to. They had lost the eyewitnesses, the proof you could lean on. They had lost every institutional structure that lets faith become a comfortable object you inherit and carry around without ever examining it. They had nothing left to possess, so they had to keep doing. That is the sermon hidden in the grammar. And here is where WokeFaith Finance lands in the middle of this conversation, because the exact same collapse happens with financial faith, relational faith, vocational faith. The moment trust becomes a label instead of a daily practice, it begins to hollow out from the inside. You say you trust the plan, but you have not looked at it in a year. You say you believe in the discipline, but you have not done the thing the discipline requires since January. The noun is doing what the noun always does. It is protecting you from the verb. Think about how this works with money in particular, because money is where the difference between the noun and the verb gets brutally honest. Anyone can say they believe in saving. Anyone can own that as an identity, the way you own a faith, and feel righteous about it. But believing in saving and saving are two completely different things, separated by an entire grammar. One is a noun you carry into conversations at dinner parties. The other is a verb you do on a random Tuesday when nobody is watching, and the easier choice is right there. The person who says, I'm a saver, and the person who saves are not always the same person. And the gap between them is exactly the gap between pistis and pisteuo, between the thing you have and the thing you do. The noun lets you feel like the kind of person who is disciplined. The verb is the only thing that ever actually makes you one. John used pisteuo 98 times not because he was repetitive and not because his vocabulary was thin. He was relentless on purpose. He was training people to believe like a discipline, the way you train a muscle, not to claim it once, like a diploma you hang on the wall and never think about again. So before we go further, what does your believing actually look like as a verb right now? Not the thing you would say you have, the thing you are actively doing. Hold that and drop your honest answer in the comments, because the next part of this changes how you would answer it. Quick word before we keep going. If this is the kind of thing that makes you want to read your Bible with the lights on, the details hiding in plain sight inside ancient words, subscribe and stay with us, because we do this every week, and the next discovery is always one verse away. Now, back to the count, because we need to return to that number, 98. Some scholars say 98, some say 99, and the disagreement is not sloppiness. It is one of the most stunning single verses in the entire gospel. Watch this. Chapter 2, verse 23. Jesus is in Jerusalem for the Passover, and the crowd is watching the signs, the miracles, real ones. And the text says they believed in his name. The verb is right there, pisteuo, people believing in Jesus. Exactly what John has been building toward for 2 chapters. This is the payoff, the thing the whole gospel wants. And then verse 24 arrives like a door slamming shut in your face. But Jesus, the text says, did not entrust himself to them. Look at the Greek word for entrust. It is pisteuo, the exact same verb, only now it is flipped completely around. Jesus is the subject of it, and he is refusing to believe in them. Read that again, because it is almost vertigo. The crowd believes in Jesus, using the verb, and in the very next breath, Jesus does not believe in the crowd, using the very same verb. He will not commit himself to people whose belief was built entirely on spectacle, on the miracle, the show, the moment of wonder that would evaporate the second the show stopped. The next sentence tells you why. He knew what was in people. He did not need anyone to testify about human beings, because he could see straight through to what was actually there. This is why some scholars count 99 occurrences, and others stop at 98. The verb functions differently here. It is not belief aimed at Jesus. It is Jesus withholding himself from belief that was only skin deep. So, do you count it or not? The honest answer is that it depends on what you think John was doing, and what John was doing is the whole point. Picture someone in that crowd, eyes wide, pulse racing, absolutely certain in that electric moment that they believed. They had seen the sign. They felt the wonder. And Jesus looked right at them and saw performance where trust should have been. He saw a noun where there should have been a verb. That single verse does not just complicate a number. It reframes every occurrence that came before it. And it should unsettle you a little, because it means belief can be real in the moment and still not be the thing. The crowd was not lying. They genuinely felt it. The wonder was authentic. And it still was not enough, because it was a noun they grabbed and not a verb they would keep. John is quietly warning his readers, and you, that the feeling of believing and the act of believing are not the same, and that the first can masquerade as the second right, up until the moment the show ends and the doing is all that is left. Because now you understand what John was tracking the whole time. He was not just counting how many times people believed. He was watching the quality of what they did with it. He was watching to see whether the believing was a verb you keep doing when the miracle is over, or a noun you grab in the moment of excitement and put down the second it gets hard. If you are wrestling with what real belief actually looks like, not the noun you carry, but the living verb you do, subscribe and join the people doing the same honest work right alongside you. So, we have been asking why John never used the noun. But maybe the deeper question, the one underneath it, is this. What kind of believing does John actually want from us? What is the verb supposed to feel like when it is real? For the answer, go back to where we started chapter 20. But first, look at what happens right before it, because the timing is everything. Just a few verses earlier, one of the 12 refuses to believe the others, Thomas. He was not in the room when Jesus appeared after the resurrection, and he says flatly that unless he sees the wounds and puts his own hand in them, he will not believe. The verb again, and when Jesus finally stands in front of him, he does not scold him. He says something aimed straight past Thomas, across the centuries, at the exact people John is writing for. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. That is the second-generation believer. That is Ephesus in the year 95. That is the household holding second-hand testimony with no eyewitness left to ask. Jesus calls them blessed not because they have a stronger noun, but because they keep doing the verb without ever getting to see. And then, immediately, John writes the sentence, "The whole gospel was built to reach." "These things are written," he says, "so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." The verb is present tense, ongoing, active, not so that you will have believed, past and finished, not so that you can possess faith, a thing in a jar, so that you may keep believing, so that the doing never stops. And buried in the oldest Greek manuscripts is one final, almost unbelievable detail. Two ancient textual traditions preserve slightly different versions of that one verb. One reads pisteuo, aorist tense, the tense of a single completed act, may come to believe. That is the door opening for someone who has never believed before, the newcomer crossing the threshold for the first time. The other reads pisteuo, present tense, continuous, may keep on believing. That is the door staying open for the people already inside, the second-generation believers holding on. For centuries, scholars have argued over which reading is the original, the newcomer's door, or the long-haul door, the first step, or the thousandth. And John's answer, the answer he embedded in 98 repetitions of a single restless verb, is both. It was always both. The door that opens for the one who has never believed is the same door that stays open for the one who has believed for 40 years and is tired. Come and believe. Keep believing. Same verb, same door. No finish line. Here is what that quietly reframes about the thing we started with. John did not refuse the word faith because he undervalued it. He refused it because he valued it too much to let it calcify into an object. Every one of those 98 uses of the verb was a door, not a trophy. A trophy goes on a shelf and gathers dust. A door has to be walked through, again and again, today and tomorrow and the morning after that. And this is where it comes home to you, in the most ordinary corners of your week. Because the places where your faith is most likely to harden into a noun are the places nobody is watching. The budget you said you trusted and never opened. The relationship you said you believed in and stopped showing up for. The calling you said you had and have not acted on since the day you named it. WokeFaith Finance keeps circling back to this for a reason. Trust that is only a label is trust that has already started to die. The verb is what keeps it alive, not the thing you would put on the form, the thing you do when no one would ever know if you skipped it. So, one more time, and this is the one that actually matters. What does your believing look like as a verb today? Not the label you carry, the living action you took, or did not take, this morning. Tell us honestly in the comments, because there are more people sitting in that exact tension than you would ever guess, and naming it out loud is the first time the verb moves. Remember where we started. One writer, one book, 98 uses of a verb, 0 uses of the noun. At the beginning, that looked like an obsession, a strange, almost compulsive fixation on a single word. Now look at it again. It looks like a mercy. The word capital W, the very first verse of John, the Logos, who was with God and was God, entered the world as an act, not a concept, not an idea sent down on a page. A person, moving, walking, touching, speaking, dying, rising. John says it himself. The Word became flesh. The Word did not become a doctrine, it became a life. And that is the hidden symmetry of the whole gospel, the bookend most people never notice. John opens with the Logos, not a teaching, but a person who acts, who makes, who comes. And he closes with the verb, not a faith you file away, but a believing you keep doing. The first word of the book and the last purpose of the book rhyme. A God who comes as a verb asks for a believing that is a verb. The shape of the Savior and the shape of the response are the same shape. Action answering action, a life answering a life. And John wrote his gospel the same way the word came as a verb, not a noun. The word he said 98 times was always an invitation, held out and held open. And the word he refused, the comfortable noun, was the only word that would have ever let you stop. So do not stop. Keep believing. The door is still open, and it was built to stay that way.